I stood frozen behind the door as my son-in-law said, "She's so lonely, she'll believe anything." My daughter laughed with him. I stayed quiet. The next morning they came for coffee, like always. But when they opened the door, they found movers taking everything out. "Mom, what's happening?" I smiled and said, "I believed you. I'm moving somewhere I'm wanted." Then the lawyer handed them an envelope. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching. Get comfortable and relax. Let's begin. The sound of my son-in-law's laughter stopped me in the hallway. I was holding 2 mugs of coffee, the porcelain warm against my palms. I had been about to push the living room door open with my shoulder. The laugh was sharp, a short bark of genuine amusement that held no warmth. It was followed by a softer, familiar chuckle from my daughter. "She's so lonely, she'll believe anything we tell her." Richard's voice carried through the wood, clear and contemptuous. My hand, which had been reaching for the doorknob, froze. The steam from the mugs drifted up past my face. I did not move. "Richard, keep your voice down," Danielle said, but there was no real scold in it. It was the tone of a co-conspirator. "Why, she's probably upstairs napping, or staring at those old photo albums again. Point is, it's working." The investment portfolio story was a masterstroke. She just nods and signs where I tell her. We'll have that savings account streamlined into ours by the end of the quarter. Then we can talk about the house. I heard the creak of the leather sofa. He had settled back, satisfied. "The house is the real asset," Danielle said, her voice lower now, a practical murmur. "This place is too much for her. All these rooms, this garden. We'd get a fantastic price. She could use a smaller, more manageable place, something easier." "A nice studio apartment somewhere," Richard agreed, his tone slick and smooth. "A tidy solution. We've been tiptoeing around her feelings for years. It's time to be adults about this. Her loneliness makes her compliant. She's desperate for our company, for our approval. We're doing her a favor, really, freeing her from all this responsibility." I stood there. The weight of the mugs was a solid, tangible thing. I counted my breaths. In, out, the coffee would be getting cold. I had made it the way Richard liked it, strong with 1 sugar. Danielle took hers with a splash of cream. I had fetched the good china, the set my mother left me, thinking a Saturday visit was a small occasion. The conversation continued, a quiet, buzzing hum of plans and assessments. My name, Ellie, was used like a placeholder for a problem to be solved. My habits, my supposed fragility, my life in this house, all of it was reduced to data points in their strategy. The love I had poured into this home, the memories embedded in every worn spot on the floorboard, the years of care, were just sentimental clutter to be cleared away. I did not feel a surge of heat. There was no dizzying rush of blood to my head. Instead, a cold clarity settled over me, like a sheet of ice forming on a still pond. It hardened the air in my lungs. It sharpened the sound of their voices into distinct, crystalline words I would remember forever. Slowly, so slowly, I took a step backward, then another. The floor did not creak. I had learned every sigh of this house over 43 years. I retreated down the hallway back toward the kitchen. My movements were precise, automatic. I set the mugs down on the granite countertop. They made a soft click. I looked at them. 2 circles of dark brown liquid, growing still. I walked out of the kitchen and up the stairs. My feet carried me to my bedroom. I closed the door. The room was quiet, filled with the late afternoon light. I sat on the edge of the bed, on the quilt I had stitched the year Danielle was born. I looked at my hands in my lap. They were steady. A single tear escaped. It traced a hot path down my cheek. I watched it fall onto the back of my hand. I observed it with a detached curiosity, as if it belonged to someone else. Then I wiped it away with the pad of my thumb. The skin there was dry. I looked around my room. The photograph of Harold on the dresser, smiling in his graduation robe. The shelf of books from my library days. The view of the magnolia tree through the window, its branches bare against the gray November sky. This was my territory. This was the kingdom they thought they could gently annex out from under a lonely old woman. A strange calm filled the space where the hurt had begun to bloom. The cold clarity intensified, focusing my mind. I replayed their words, not just the cruelty, but the specifics. The invented investment portfolio. The target, my savings, then my house. The timeline, the end of the quarter. The method, exploiting my perceived loneliness and trust. They had made a critical error. They had mistaken quietness for simplicity. They had interpreted a mother's open heart as a vacant mind. They had seen a retired librarian, a widow with silver hair, and they had seen a mark. I stood up and walked to the mirror above the dresser. I met my own eyes. They were not red or weepy. They were dark, focused, and still. I saw the woman they saw, the gentle grandmother, the eager hostess, the soft touch. But I also saw the woman I was, Eleanor Beaumont. A woman who had managed a household budget for decades, who had navigated the complexities of a public career, who had buried a husband and raised a child alone. A woman who knew how to research, to plan, to execute. The fracture was complete. The hopeful trust I had nurtured, the willing vulnerability I had offered my only child, snapped cleanly. What remained was a pure, undiluted resolve. It had no room for hysterics. It had no need for shouted accusations. That was their language, the language of impulsive greed and casual cruelty. My language would be different. It would be the language of documents, of signatures, of quiet, irrevocable actions. It would be the language of consequence. I heard the sound of their footsteps downstairs, the murmur of their voices moving toward the front hall. They were leaving. They would call out a casual goodbye, assuming I was resting, content in the knowledge of their cleverness and my gullibility. I remained in my room, silent. I listened to the front door open and shut. The lock clicked into place. The house settled back into its familiar silence, but it was a different silence now. It was no longer peaceful. It was expectant. It was waiting for me. I sat back down on the bed. I did not think about the past, about birthday parties in the garden or Christmases by the fireplace. That would come later with a different kind of pain. Right now, I thought only of the future. I thought about steps. The first step was information. The second was an ally. I knew what I had to do. The plan did not form in a dramatic flash. It unspooled with logical, cold efficiency. First, I would need to act normally. I would need to be the Ellie they expected for just a little while longer. Then, on Monday morning, I would visit Mr. Jenkins. He had been Harold's friend. He was a man of law and order. The anger was there, a deep, cold pool of it in my stomach. But I would not let it control me. I would let it fuel me. I would convert every ounce of betrayal into meticulous action. They had laughed at my loneliness. They would learn that a woman who has lived alone with her thoughts for years has had plenty of time to think and to plan. I stood up again, straightened the quilt, and left the bedroom. I went downstairs. The living room was empty. The sofa cushions were dented where they had sat. I picked up the 2 cold, full mugs of coffee from the kitchen counter. I poured the contents down the sink, watching the brown liquid swirl and disappear. I washed the mugs by hand, drying them carefully with a linen towel until they shone. I put them back in the cabinet, behind the glass door. The house was very quiet. I walked to the front window and looked out at the empty driveway. The street was still. Night was beginning to fall. I turned away from the window. I had preparations to make. The performance would begin tomorrow. But tonight, in the quiet, I let the mask fall completely. My face in the dark window's reflection showed no grief, no anguish. It was a map of calm determination. The tear had been the last gift I would give them. Everything from now on would be a transaction, and I intended to balance the books. The night passed without sleep. I did not lie awake weeping. I lay awake planning. The quiet hours were for cataloging facts, not feelings. I reviewed bank statements in my mind. I recalled the documents Richard had asked me to sign over the past year, always with a plausible, patient explanation. I remembered the dates of Danielle's visits, how they had become shorter, more formulaic, always ending with a conversation about my future security. The puzzle pieces, which I had ignored out of love, now snapped together with a final, undeniable click. When the first gray light of Saturday morning touched the windows, I got up. I moved through my routine with mechanical precision. Shower, dress, make the bed. The house felt like a stage set, and I was the sole actor preparing for a matinee performance. My role was Eleanor Beaumont, the unsuspecting mother. I would play it flawlessly. I went downstairs and began preparing the kitchen for their arrival. I took out the good coffee beans, not the everyday grounds. I selected the china mugs, the same ones from yesterday, now clean and impersonal. I took a lemon pound cake from the freezer, one I had baked 2 weeks prior, and set it on the counter to thaw. Every action was deliberate, a piece of set dressing for the scene they expected. At 10 o'clock exactly, I heard the car pull into the driveway. The sound of the engine was familiar. I stood at the sink, looking out at the barren November garden, my back to the door. I heard the key turn in the lock. They still had a key and the cheerful call. "Mom, we're here." I turned, arranging my face into a warm, slightly tired smile. In the kitchen. Danielle entered first, offering a quick, dry kiss on my cheek. She smelled of her expensive, floral perfume and cold air. "Something smells good." "Just the coffee, and I defrosted a cake." Richard followed, already shrugging off his coat. "Ellie, you're a saint. That Saturday coffee is the highlight of the week." He said it with a broad, practiced smile, the same one he used at corporate mixers. "Sit, sit," I said, gesturing to the round kitchen table. The morning sun streamed in, illuminating the dust motes in the air. It was a picture of domestic warmth. I poured the coffee, my hands steady. I placed Richard's mug in front of him, then Danielle's with the small porcelain pitcher of cream beside it. "So, how was your week, Mom?" Danielle asked, stirring her coffee. It was her standard opening line. "Quiet," I said, taking my own seat. "The usual, some reading, a bit of gardening before the frost." I kept my voice light, pleasant. "And yours, busy, I imagine." Richard jumped in, as he always did. "A whirlwind. This merger is consuming everything. But it's promising, very promising. Speaking of which," he took a sip of coffee. "I was reviewing those investment figures we discussed. The returns are looking strong. I'll need you to sign a couple more transfer authorizations next week. Just a formality to consolidate everything into the higher-yield fund." I looked at him, holding his gaze for just a second longer than normal. I saw the confident gleam in his eye, the utter lack of suspicion. He saw only my polite attention. "Of course, Richard," I said, nodding slowly. "Whatever you think is best. You've always been so good with these things." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Danielle's shoulders relax almost imperceptibly. She took a bite of the pound cake. "This is delicious, Mom." "Thank you, dear." They exchanged a glance then. It was quick, a flicker of eyes meeting over the rims of their mugs. It wasn't a guilty glance. It was a glance of shared satisfaction, of confirmation. "See," it said. "Told you. No trouble at all." The memory of their laughter from behind the door echoed in my mind, but I kept my smile placid. "This house really is a lot for you, isn't it?" Danielle said, her tone shifting to one of gentle concern. She looked around the sunny kitchen. "All this space, the stairs, the yard work in the spring must be daunting." I followed her gaze, as if considering it for the first time. "Oh, I manage. It holds a lot of memories. But you're right, it is a responsibility." Richard leaned forward, adopting his most sincere posture. "We just worry, Ellie. We want you to be safe, comfortable, without any burdens. There are some wonderful new senior living communities, full of activities, people your own age. No maintenance worries." "They have fantastic security, too," Danielle added. "You'd have so much more freedom, honestly." I nodded, letting a hint of thoughtful uncertainty play on my face. "I suppose I haven't really considered it seriously. It seems like such a big change." "Change can be good," Richard said, his voice oozing reassurance. "We'd help you every step of the way. It would be a project for us, a positive one." A project, like I was a piece of estate planning. I looked down at my coffee, the black surface reflecting nothing. "That's very kind of you both to think of me," I murmured. The conversation drifted then to their plans for the holidays, to a new restaurant they'd tried. I contributed just enough, asking small questions, making the expected sounds of interest. I refilled their coffee. I cut more slices of cake. I watched them eat, their movements quick and efficient. They did not savor the cake I had baked. They consumed it. After an hour, Richard glanced at his watch. "Well, we should probably get going. We've got that thing across town." "Of course," I said, standing. "Don't let me keep you." Danielle stood and began clearing the mugs to the sink. "Leave those, dear," I said. "I'll get them." She paused, then gave a small shrug. "All right, thanks for coffee, Mom." She gave me another brisk kiss. "We'll talk more about things soon." Richard was already putting on his coat. "And I'll email those documents over on Monday. You just need to sign and send them back. Simple." "I look forward to it," I said, the lie smooth and cool on my tongue. I walked them to the door. They stepped out into the crisp morning. As Richard turned to say a final goodbye, he pulled out his wallet. He extracted a $50 bill. "Here, Ellie," he said, pressing it into my hand. "For the groceries, for the cake, treat yourself." I stared at the money in my palm. It was not kindness. It was a transaction, a payment for my compliance, for my continued role as the harmless, financially dependent mother-in-law. It was the price of my dignity, and he thought it was a bargain. I closed my fingers around the bill. I did not throw it back. I did not protest. I looked up at him and smiled. "Thank you, Richard. That's very generous." He patted my shoulder. "Our pleasure. Take care now." I watched them walk to their car, a sleek silver sedan that looked out of place on my worn driveway. I waved once as they backed out. I kept the smile on my face until the car turned the corner and disappeared. Then I closed the door. The lock engaged with a solid, final sound. I stood in the quiet hallway. I opened my hand. The $50 bill was crumpled in my fist. I walked back to the kitchen. I did not put it in my purse. I placed it on the counter, a flat green rectangle against the granite. I began to clear the table. I washed the 3 mugs, the dessert plates, the cake knife. I wiped the table. I put the remainder of the cake, now half-eaten, back into the freezer. I restored the kitchen to its perfect, empty order. The performance was over. It had been a success. They believed the script completely. I picked up the $50 bill again. I folded it neatly into quarters. I would not spend it. I would keep it. A reminder of the final price they placed on me and the first installment of the cost they would soon learn to pay. Monday was a business day. Banks and law offices would be open. I had a list of tasks to complete before then, mundane things that would arouse no suspicion. But the real work, the silent work, was already done. The decision was made. The path was clear. I looked at the clean, sunlit kitchen, at the empty chairs around the table. There was no sadness left in the space. There was only a waiting stillness. I had played my part in their little drama. Now it was time to write my own. The folded $50 bill remained on my kitchen counter throughout Sunday. It was a paper anchor, holding me to the reality of what I had to do. I did not leave the house. I occupied myself with small, normal tasks. I paid a few bills online. I watered the plants. I read a mystery novel but retained none of the plot. My mind was a silent rehearsal room, running through the lines I would need to say, the questions I might be asked. On Monday morning, I dressed with care. I chose a navy blue wool dress, simple but well-tailored, and a single strand of pearls. I applied a faint touch of lipstick. The woman in the mirror looked composed, respectable, the sort of woman whose word would be taken seriously in a professional setting. I did not look like a victim. I looked like a client. The offices of Jenkins and Sons were located in a quiet, brick-fronted building in the older part of downtown. Harold had introduced me to Alastair Jenkins decades ago. They had served on a community board together. I had not seen him since the funeral, but I had retained his holiday cards, his firm's name tucked in the back of my address book for what I had thought was merely a formality. The reception area was paneled in dark wood. The air smelled of lemon polish and old paper. A young woman at the front desk smiled. "May I help you?" "I have an appointment to see Mr. Alastair Jenkins, Eleanor Beaumont." She checked a ledger, an actual paper ledger, and nodded. "Yes, Mrs. Beaumont. He's expecting you, right this way." She led me down a hushed corridor to a corner office. The door was open. Alastair Jenkins stood up from behind a large, orderly desk as I entered. He was a tall man, slender, with a full head of white hair and sharp, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a 3-piece suit. "Eleanor," he said, coming around the desk to take my hand in both of his. His grip was dry and firm. It is so good to see you, though I wish it were under happier circumstances. Please sit. I took the leather chair facing his desk. He returned to his own seat, steepling his fingers. Your call yesterday was rather cryptic. You said it was a matter of some urgency regarding your estate. It is, I began. My voice was clear, level. I had practiced. I need your help to execute several legal and financial actions, and I need them done quickly and for now with absolute discretion. He leaned forward slightly, his professional demeanor fully engaged. Of course, you have my complete confidentiality. Start from the beginning. So I did. I told him everything. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice. I stated facts. I recounted the exact words I had overheard from behind the living room door. I listed the documents Richard had brought for me to sign, describing them as best I could. The authorization forms, the transfer requests, always framed as savvy investment moves. I told him about the Saturday coffee performance, about the $50 left on my counter. I explained their growing narrative about my house being a burden, their push toward a senior community. As I spoke, his expression changed from polite attention to grave concern, and then to something harder, a sharp, legal anger. He made a few notes on a yellow legal pad. Do you have copies of these documents you signed? He asked. Some, others Richard said he would file. I was trusting. We will obtain copies from the financial institutions directly. First, we must establish a firewall. He opened a file drawer and pulled out some forms. I need you to sign a revocation of any power of attorney you may have granted to either Danielle or Richard. Do you recall if you ever did so? I thought back. There was a form last year. Richard said it was a standard thing to allow him to talk to the financial advisors on my behalf if I was unavailable. I signed it. Mr. Jenkins's mouth became a thin line. He nodded. We revoke that today. Now. Then we contact every institution where you hold an account. We change all access codes, passwords, and security questions. We freeze everything pending a full audit. We will also need to see your most recent tax returns and property deed. The house is in my name only, I said. Harold left it to me outright. A very good thing, he murmured. He looked at me, his gaze direct. Eleanor, what is your desired outcome? Do you wish to press charges? This constitutes fraud, possibly elder exploitation. I considered the question. The cold pool of anger inside me was perfectly still. No, I said. I do not want a public scandal or a protracted court case. That would be their drama and I would be a character in it, the wronged mother. I want a clean severance. I want my assets secured and removed from their reach. I want to sell my house on my own terms and move to a place of my choosing. And I want them to know in no uncertain terms that I know what they did and that it has failed. A slow, approving smile touched his lips. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a chess master appreciating a clever move. A civil, rather than criminal, resolution, more elegant and often more devastating. I can help you achieve that. For the next hour, we worked. I signed the revocation. He provided a list of every document and piece of information I would need to gather. He explained the process of setting up a new, irrevocable trust to hold my assets, with him as the trustee and myself as the sole beneficiary. It would be legally untouchable by Danielle or Richard. In the house, I asked. We list it for sale immediately. A quiet listing with a broker I trust. Given the market and the condition of the property, it should sell quickly. Where would you like to go? I told him about the senior community I had researched months ago, almost as a daydream after a particularly lonely week. The Greens. It was a purchase, not a rental, a condo in a vibrant, active building with a library and gardens. I had the brochure in my handbag. I showed it to him. He examined it. A sound investment, and it puts you in control of your equity. You will be downsizing your space, but not your autonomy. He looked up. There is one more item. You said you want them to know. How would you like that communication to occur? I had thought of this. A letter, I said. From you as my legal counsel, delivered by hand. It should state that I am terminating their involvement in my financial affairs due to a conflict of interest. It should reference the revocation of power of attorney. It should state my intention to sell the property and relocate. It should be clear, factual, and legally precise. No emotion. And the funds they've already misappropriated, he asked. Calculate the exact amount if you can. Then, include a check for that amount in the envelope. He raised an eyebrow. A check. A check from me, I clarified. A repayment. I do not want to be in their debt, even negatively. I want to repay every penny they took with a line on the memo that says full and final settlement of personal loans. I met his gaze. I want to give them their money back, Alistair. I want them to hold the proof of their petty theft in their hands, cashed and spent, while the house and everything else slips away from them forever. That will be the cut they feel. There was a long silence in the wood-paneled office. The clock on the wall ticked softly. Harold would be proud of you, he said finally, his voice low. And he would be furious with them, consider it done. I stood up, feeling the weight of the morning's work in my bones, but also a new, tensile strength. How long will this take? The financial freeze today, the trust a few days, the house listing by Wednesday. The letter, I will have it ready for your review tomorrow. When should it be delivered? I calculated, next Tuesday in the morning. That would give me time. He walked me to the office door. Eleanor, are you certain you're all right? This is a profound betrayal. I paused on the threshold. The composed client facade did not crack. I am not all right, I stated. But I will be, and I am certain. Thank you, Alistair. I left the quiet, orderly world of the law office and stepped out into the brisk autumn day. The sun was bright. People hurried past on the sidewalk, living their ordinary Monday lives. I took a deep breath of the cold air. The first move was made. The machinery was in motion. I did not feel triumph. I felt the clean, cold satisfaction of a necessary task begun. I walked to the bus stop, my back straight, my steps even. I had a list of things to do. I would start with the bank. The silence of the house when I returned from the bank was different. It was no longer a passive quiet, but an active one, a space being readied for departure. I had done what Mr. Jenkins advised, sat with the branch manager, a serious woman named Linda, and revoked all previous authorizations. New accounts were opened, statements would be sent to a post office box. The old accounts were frozen, pending the audit. The process was bureaucratic, dry, and utterly final. Linda's polite, professional sympathy was easier to bear than false family concern. Now the real work began. I went to the basement and brought up a stack of moving boxes I had saved from years ago, flattened and dusty. I carried them up to the attic first. That seemed the logical place to start, the past stored away. The attic was cool and smelled of cedar and old paper. Trunks and labeled containers lined the eaves. I was not here for everything. I was here for the essentials, the pieces of a life I would carry into the next one. I opened a trunk marked Harold's papers and photos. On top lay a large leather-bound album. I sat on the dusty floorboards and opened it. The first photo was our wedding day. Harold, young and sharp in his suit, his arm around me. My own face, so much younger, smiled back, full of a hope that felt both achingly familiar and belonging to a stranger. We looked like we knew the script to a happy life, and for many years we had followed it. I turned the page. Danielle as a baby, swaddled in a yellow blanket. Danielle on her first bike, Harold running beside her, his hand on the seat. A birthday party at this very house, streamers in the dining room, a cake I had stayed up late to decorate. The memories were not a wave of sorrow. They were data points. Evidence of a construction, a family we had built together. The love had been real. That was what made the present betrayal a structural failure, not just a superficial crack. I studied the photo of Danielle's graduation. She stood between us, her smile bright, ambitious. Was the distance already there, hidden in her poised posture, her gaze fixed on a point beyond the camera? It was impossible to say. I did not linger. I removed a selection of photographs from the album. Harold and me on our honeymoon, a picture of my parents, one of Danielle as a laughing toddler. I left the later years, the group shots, the Christmases that already felt staged. I placed the chosen few in a folder. The rest of the album stayed in the trunk. Next, I found the small box of Harold's personal effects. I took his watch, the one he wore every day, and his wedding band. I took the fountain pen he loved. These were not for display. They were for a small, private drawer in a new home. I closed the trunk. The rest of the afternoon and the following day were dedicated to systematic, silent packing. I worked room by room, but not on the main living spaces. I started with my bedroom, my study, the china cabinet that held my mother's dishes. I wrapped each piece of china in newspaper, placing them carefully in a box marked kitchen/fragile. I took my favorite books from the shelves, the ones with margins filled with my notes. I packed the quilt from my bed. I did not answer the landline when it rang. I let the machine pick up. It was Danielle on Tuesday evening, her voice breezy. "Hey, Mom, just checking in. Richard sent those documents over. Let me know when you get them. Talk soon." The tone was so normal, so utterly unaware of the earthquake that had already leveled the ground beneath her feet. I erased the message. On Wednesday, a pleasant woman named Marjorie from the realty office came by. She walked through the house with a clipboard, making notes. "It's in beautiful condition, Mrs. Beaumont. A classic. We'll have no trouble at all." She did not ask probing questions about my rush. Mr. Jenkins had prepared her. The for sale sign would go up on Friday. The listing would be discreet, online primarily, but it would be findable if someone knew where to look. That afternoon, I made the call I had rehearsed. I dialed the number for the Greens. I spoke to the residency director, a man named Ben. I told him I was interested in the 2-bedroom condo I had seen in the brochure. I asked about the immediate move-in timeline. "We have one available on the 3rd floor overlooking the gardens," Ben said. "It's turnkey. We can process the application quickly. When were you thinking?" "Next Tuesday," I said. There was a brief pause. "That is quick, but if your finances are in order and you're ready, we can make that work. Would you like to come for a tour?" "I've seen the brochure and the floor plans. I'm satisfied. I will have my lawyer, Mr. Alastair Jenkins, contact you tomorrow to handle the paperwork and the wire transfer for the down payment." My certainty seemed to reassure him. "Very well, Mrs. Beaumont. We'll await his call." The largest step was taken. I had a destination. Now the final piece was the extraction. I continued packing through Thursday and Friday. I hired a moving company, recommended by Marjorie, for Tuesday morning. I gave them instructions, only the boxes and furniture marked with blue tape. Everything else was to remain. I did not mark the living room sofa, the formal dining set, the large bedroom furniture. They were anchors to a past life I was leaving behind. They could be sold with the house or donated. By Friday night, my private spaces were hollowed out. Boxes lined the walls of my bedroom and study. The attic trunk was sealed. The house still looked lived into a casual glance, but its heart, the collected fragments of my personal history, was boxed and ready for transit. I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had shared coffee and cake days before. The folded $50 bill was still there. I picked it up. I would not need it. It was not my money. It was a prop. I thought about Tuesday. I envisioned the movers loading the truck. I envisioned the empty living room. I would leave one chair. I would wait there. They would come. They always came on Saturdays, but the sign would go up Friday. Their curiosity, or more likely their panic, would override their schedule. The plan was no longer a series of thoughts. It was a sequence of events locked in place. The house was listed. The new home was secured. The money was walled away. The letter was being drafted. I felt a profound tiredness, but it was a clean tiredness, the fatigue that follows heavy, necessary labor. There was no more indecision. There was only the countdown. I went upstairs, bypassing the boxes, and prepared for bed. The house around me was full of ghosts, but they were quiet ghosts. They had given their testimony. I had packed it away. Now all that remained was the leaving. The Tuesday morning sky was a flat, pale gray. I woke at my usual time. I showered, dressed in comfortable slacks and a sweater, and made a single piece of toast. I ate it standing at the kitchen counter. The house was a shell around me, the boxes along the walls like silent spectators. I placed the folded $50 bill on the counter. I would not take it with me. At 8 o'clock precisely, a large moving van pulled into the driveway. 2 men got out. I had spoken to the foreman, Leo, on the phone. He was a burly man with a kind face. He knocked on the front door. "Mrs. Beaumont, we're here for the blue tape items." "Yes, come in." I stepped back. "The boxes and furniture with blue painter's tape are to go. Everything else stays. The boxes are mainly in the bedroom down the hall and the study. There are a few in the dining room. Leo nodded, looking past me into the living room. You want this furniture to stay? He gestured to the sofa, the armchairs, the coffee table. All of it, just the taped items. He and his partner got to work. I stayed out of their way. I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee, not for myself, but for them. I placed 2 mugs and the pot on a tray and set it on the cleared dining table. Help yourselves, I said. Much appreciated, ma'am. The sound of their work filled the house. The heavy tread of boots, the rustle of moving blankets, the low calls between them. It was not a sad sound. It was the sound of a process, efficient and physical. I watched from the kitchen doorway as they carried out my bed frame, the headboard, the dresser marked with blue. They loaded the boxes, one after another. Each box contained a curated piece of my life. Books, photographs, kitchenware, the quilt. By 11, the van was nearly full. The rooms they had cleared stood empty, marked only by faint indentations in the carpet where furniture had rested for decades. The house echoed with a new, hollow acoustics. Leo approached me, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. That's the last of the taped items, Mrs. Beaumont. We'll secure the load and be on our way. The new address is the Greens, correct? We'll meet you there for unloading this afternoon. That's correct. Thank you, Leo. He hesitated, looking around. You're not taking much. I don't need much, I said. He nodded, a professional acceptance of a client's peculiarities, and went back outside. I walked through the house. My footsteps were loud in the empty spaces. The living room was as it had always been, fully furnished, yet it felt utterly vacant. The life had been in the books now packed away, in the photos removed from the walls, in the personal clutter now boxed. What remained was a stage set, waiting for the final scene. I had left one item, a single, straight-backed wooden chair from the kitchen. I carried it into the center of the living room and placed it facing the front door. I sat down. I folded my hands in my lap. I waited. I did not have to wait long. At 11:20, I heard a car speed into the driveway, the tires crunching gravel too fast. 2 doors slammed in quick succession. Hurried footsteps on the front walk. The doorbell rang, a long, insistent chime. I did not get up. I sat in my chair. The bell rang again, followed by a rapid knocking. Mom, are you in there? Danielle's voice, sharp with alarm. I remained seated, silent. A key rattled in the lock. The door swung open. Danielle stood there, Richard just behind her. They were both breathing heavily as if they had run. Danielle's eyes were wide, scanning the room, seeing the familiar furniture but sensing the emptiness. They landed on me, sitting alone in the middle of the floor. Mom, she said again, stepping inside. Richard followed, closing the door behind him. His face was tight, his eyes scanning the room with a calculation that was now purely defensive. What is going on? Danielle's voice rose. There's a moving van leaving. There's a for sale sign on the lawn. What are you doing? I looked at her, I looked at Richard. I kept my hands folded. My posture was calm. I am moving, I said. My voice was even, devoid of the tremor they might have expected. Moving where? Why? Danielle took another step forward, her gaze darting around as if searching for the hidden cameras, the prank. Why was I consulted? This is insane. Richard placed a restraining hand on her arm. His voice was smoother, trying to reclaim control. Ellie, clearly there's been a misunderstanding. You can't just sell the house. There are procedures. We've been helping you plan for a transition, but this is abrupt. Let's sit down and talk about this rationally. I am sitting, I said, and we can talk, but there is no misunderstanding. Danielle shook off Richard's hand. What about your things, all the furniture, Grandma's china? What I wanted, I took. The rest stays. It will be sold with the house or donated. You took, Richard's brow furrowed. The financial implications were dawning on him. Where are your financial documents? Have you done something with the accounts? I allowed a small, cool smile to touch my lips. It was not a friendly smile. The accounts are secure. They are no longer your concern. The color drained from Richard's face. What did you do? At that moment, as if on cue, a car pulled up quietly outside. I saw the shape of a dark sedan through the front window. The driver's door opened, and Mr. Jenkins emerged, carrying a slim leather portfolio. "Who is that?" Danielle asked, her voice a whisper now. "My lawyer," I said. I watched their faces. Danielle's confusion curdled into dawning horror. Richard's calculation shifted into pure, icy panic. They both turned as the front door, which they had left ajar, pushed open fully. Alastair Jenkins stood in the doorway, impeccable in his overcoat. He nodded to me. "A leaner." Then he turned to Danielle and Richard. His expression was professionally neutral. "Mrs. Carter, Mr. Carter, I have something for you." He extended the leather portfolio. "This is for both of you. It requires your attention." Danielle stared at the portfolio as if it were a live snake. Richard, his jaw clenched, reached out and took it. I stood up from my chair. The movement was slow, deliberate. I picked up my handbag, which had been on the floor beside the chair. I looked at my daughter, at the man she had chosen. I had practiced this line. It was simple. It was true. "I believed you," I said, my voice clear in the hollow room. "I'm moving somewhere I'm wanted." I walked past them, toward the door where Mr. Jenkins stood. Neither of them moved to stop me. They were fixed in place, holding the leather envelope that contained the uninvited truth, finally delivered. I walked past them, through the open doorway where Mr. Jenkins stood. The cold autumn air hit my face, a sharp contrast to the stale tension inside. I heard a choked sound from Danielle behind me. "Mom, wait, stop." I paused on the front step but did not turn around. Mr. Jenkins gave me a slight nod and then stepped back inside the house, closing the door behind him, leaving me outside on the step. He would handle the immediate legalities. I stood there, looking at the empty driveway where the moving van had been. My own car, a small sedan I'd packed earlier with a suitcase and essential files, was parked on the street. The door opened again a moment later, and Mr. Jenkins joined me, his expression unreadable. "They are reviewing the documents," he said quietly. "I advised them to read carefully." From inside, I heard Richard's voice, raised but indistinct. Then the door was yanked open again. Danielle stood there, the leather portfolio clutched in one hand, her face pale and streaked with angry tears. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "A formal letter, a check. What are you doing?" I turned to face her. Richard appeared behind her, his eyes scanning the letter in his hands, his lips moving silently as he read. "It is a statement of fact," I said. My voice was calm. It carried in the quiet of the front yard. "It outlines the severance of your involvement in my life, specifically in my financial and property affairs." "Severance," Danielle spat the word. "We're your family." "You were," I said. The past tense hung in the air between us. Richard looked up from the letter, his face a mask of controlled fury. This is libel, accusing us of conflict of interest, of mishandling funds. You have no proof." "I have my bank records," I said. "The frozen accounts, the audit that is currently underway. Mr. Jenkins has already initiated it. You are welcome to explain your investment strategy to the auditors. I believe they will find the paper trail you created quite instructive." Danielle took a step forward, her hand outstretched as if to grab my arm. Mr. Jenkins shifted slightly, a subtle movement that placed him between us. She dropped her hand. "You listened. You were eavesdropping. That's how you make decisions, based on a private conversation." "You had that conversation in my living room," I said. "You assumed I was not a participant in my own life. That was your error." "We were worried about you." Her shout was loud, desperate. "This house, your isolation, we were planning for your future." "You were planning for my money," I corrected her. There was no heat in my words, only a flat precision. "You were planning for this house's equity. You discussed my loneliness as a tactical advantage. I heard the word compliant. I heard the laughter." For the first time, a flicker of something other than anger crossed Danielle's face. It was shame, quick and hot, instantly buried by defensiveness. "You're twisting it. You're taking things out of context because you're hurt." "I am not hurt," I said. It was almost true. The raw hurt had been cauterized by action. I am resolved. The context was perfectly clear. You and your husband saw an opportunity in my vulnerability. You acted on it. Now I am acting on mine. Richard waved the letter. This check, this settlement amount, where did you get this figure? It is the total sum of all transfers you initiated from my savings to accounts under your control over the past 14 months, Mr. Jenkins interjected, his tone dry and professional. It was calculated from the preliminary bank records. Cashing that check constitutes your agreement that it represents full repayment and settles any personal debt between you and Mrs. Beaumont. It is advisable that you cash it. This is a trick, Richard muttered, but he was staring at the check at the amount. It was a significant sum, but far less than the house. It was the price of their greed, quantified. No trick, I said. It is simply a settlement. I do not wish to owe you anything, not money, not explanations, not a relationship. Danielle shook her head, her eyes searching my face for some sign of the mother she knew, the one who would soften, who would forgive. You can't just cut us out. Where will you go? What will you do? I have purchased a condo at the Greens. The movers are taking my things there now. It is a community for people 55 and older. It has a library, gardens, social clubs. I will be quite content. You bought it. With what? Richard's head snapped up, the financial planner in him overriding his panic. With my money, I said. The money that is now in a trust managed by Mr. Jenkins. It is no longer accessible to you. The house sale will proceed. The proceeds will also go into the trust. My will has been updated. You are no longer beneficiaries. The finality of it all seemed to crash down on Danielle at once. Her defiance crumpled. Mom, please, we can talk about this. We can fix this. I'm your daughter. I looked at her, at the woman she had become. I felt a distant ache like an old scar in cold weather, but it did not change my mind. You are my daughter, and you chose to betray me with your husband. You laughed with him. You made a plan to dismantle my life for your gain. That is a choice with consequences. This, I gestured to the letter in her hand, to the empty house behind her, is the consequence. I turned and walked toward my car. I did not look back. You'll be alone, Danielle cried out, her voice breaking. You'll be all alone there. I opened the car door. I paused and looked at her one last time over the roof of the car. The serene smile I had practiced was gone. My face was simply calm. I was already alone, I said. The difference now is that I have a door, and I control the lock. I got into the car, started the engine, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw them standing on the front step, two diminished figures clutching the leather portfolio, framed by the house they had coveted. Mr. Jenkins remained with them, a sober figure ensuring the delivery was complete. I did not see their expressions. I did not need to. I had said all I needed to say. The confrontation was over. The envelope was in their hands. The next move was theirs, but the game, as they understood it, was already finished. The drive to the Greens took 20 minutes. The movers were already there, the van parked near the building's entrance. Leo gave me a wave as I pulled into my assigned parking space. My hands were steady on the wheel. My breathing was even. The scene I had left behind felt like something I had watched on a screen, vivid but separate from the person now stepping out into a new parking lot. I did not go immediately to my new condo. I stood for a moment, looking at the building. It was modern, built of warm brick with large windows. A few people walked along the landscaped paths. A woman about my age waved from a bench near a bird feeder. I nodded in return. Leo approached. All ready for you, Mrs. Beaumont. We'll start bringing everything up. Thank you. The unit is on the 3rd floor, 312. I'll meet you there. I took the elevator up. The hallway was quiet, carpeted, well lit. I found the door, unlocked it with the new key I'd picked up from the office earlier, and stepped inside. The space was empty, clean, and full of light. Sun streamed through a sliding glass door that led to a small balcony. The walls were a neutral cream. The floors were a light, polished wood. It smelled of fresh paint and cleanliness. I walked through the 2 bedrooms, the bathroom, the compact kitchen. It was not my house. It was a blank page. The movers arrived with the first boxes. I directed them, room by room. The bed frame and mattress went into the larger bedroom. The boxes marked bedroom and study went there. The kitchen boxes were placed in the kitchen. The process was methodical, a reversal of the emptying that had happened just hours before. My phone rang in my handbag. I saw it was Mr. Jenkins. I answered. Eleanor, they have read the documents. I am still at the property. What is their status? I asked. I walked out onto the small balcony for privacy. The air was cooler up here. Mr. Carter is attempting to maintain a legalistic posture. He is questioning the validity of the trust, the speed of the sale. He is demanding to see the power of attorney revocation. I have provided him with a copy. He is now reviewing it. His color is poor. And Danielle. A brief pause. She is quiet. She sat on the stairs. She has not spoken for some time. She is holding the check. I looked out at the small garden below. What does the letter state exactly? I approved the draft, but I want to hear it as they did. His voice became even more precise, reciting. The letter is on my firm's letterhead. It states, this correspondence serves as formal notice that, as of this date, your services in an advisory or managerial capacity regarding the financial and personal affairs of Mrs. Eleanor Beaumont are terminated. This termination is due to an irreconcilable conflict of interest. All previously granted powers of attorney are revoked and nullified. Enclosed, please find a certified check representing the full sum of funds transferred from Mrs. Beaumont's accounts to your control over the past 14 months, per attached accounting. Cashing this check will be considered full and final settlement of any related personal debts or claims. It then goes on to state that the property at my address has been listed for sale by the owner, Mrs. Beaumont, and that you have secured alternative housing. It concludes by instructing all future communications to go through this office. And the check amount, $28,450, he said. It is the total of every transfer, down to the last unauthorized withdrawal for what appears to be a processing fee. The memo line reads as you requested, full and final settlement of personal loans. A dry, soundless laugh escaped me. It was not amusement. It was recognition. They had siphoned $28,000 in 14 months, betting on my ignorance. It was a significant, hurtful sum. But in the context of the house, the full savings, it was also small, petty. Their grand scheme had a petty, grasping total. What will they do? I asked. Mr. Carter is already talking about consulting his own attorney. He is claiming undue influence, lack of capacity. I informed him that a full medical assessment of your capacity, conducted by an independent geriatric specialist, is already scheduled for this week at my request, to preempt any such challenge. I also reminded him that his own financial advisement, given his personal gain, is a clear ethical breach that his professional licensing board would find interesting. He became quiet. I could imagine it. Richard, faced not with emotional pleas but with superior legal preparation. His tools were blunted. And the house. The realtor, Marjorie, has informed me there are already 2 showings scheduled for this afternoon. The listing price is competitive. She expects a quick offer. I have instructed her that any offer must allow for a 60-day closing, giving you time here to settle, but that the sale is not contingent on your finding further housing. It is a simple transaction. Good, I said. There was nothing else to say. Eleanor, they will likely try to contact you, directly. I know. Do you want a formal cease and desist prepared? Not yet, let them try. I will not answer. We ended the call. I stayed on the balcony. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of turned earth from the garden. I thought of the check in Danielle's hand, $28,450. I wondered if she was thinking about the individual lies that built that number, the conversation about the high-yield bond, the story about the administrative consolidation, the $50 for groceries on the counter. I thought of Richard, his mind racing through legal loopholes that were already closed, his rage that his cleverness had been outmaneuvered by the quiet librarian. His primary emotion would not be remorse. It would be stunned humiliation. The movers called me from inside. They were finished. The boxes were stacked in the appropriate rooms. The furniture was placed. The van was empty. I thanked them and paid the agreed amount plus a tip. They left. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by boxes in a new, sunlit space. The confrontation was over. The documents had been delivered. The machinery they had set in motion to disassemble my life had been dismantled and turned against them with a silent, legal efficiency. The revenge was not dramatic. It was administrative. It was a series of signatures, transfers, and certified letters. It was a check with a specific memo line. It was the sound of a lock turning, not with a slam, but with a smooth, final click. I opened a box marked kitchen/ESSENTIALS. I took out a kettle, a mug, a small canister of tea. I filled the kettle in the shiny new sink and turned it on. The mundane action grounded me. While the water heated, I took the folder of selected photographs from my handbag. I chose one, a picture of Harold and me, smiling on a long-ago beach vacation. I propped it on the kitchen counter, against the backsplash. The kettle whistled. I poured the water. I did not think about the contents of the envelope anymore. They were now someone else's problem. My task was here, in this new space, with this cup of tea, and the quiet that was no longer lonely, but chosen. The next several days passed in a rhythm of unpacking and quiet orientation. The large, empty space of the condo began to shrink as I filled it with the contents of my boxes. It was a process of selection, not just placement. I did not hang every picture. I did not unpack every knick-knack. I chose the items that represented the life I wanted to carry forward, leaving the rest stored in the second bedroom, which I designated as a study. On the third day, I was arranging books on the shelves in the living room when a light knock sounded at my door. I opened it to find a woman about my own age, with short, curly white hair and bright eyes. She wore a colorful sweater and held a small plate covered in plastic wrap. "Hello there," she said, her smile genuine. "I'm Clara Gable from down the hall in 308. Welcome to the third floor. I brought you some banana bread. It's still warm." I hesitated for only a second before accepting the plate. "Thank you. That's very kind. I'm Aliner Beaumont." "We're a friendly bunch here, Aliner. Not nosy, but friendly. If you need to know where anything is, or if you just fancy a cup of tea, my door is usually open. I saw the movers. Big change." "A necessary one," I said. She nodded as if that were a complete and understandable answer. "Well, you'll find most of us here are in the same boat. Life handed us a new chapter. Some of us chose the page, some had it chosen for them, but we're all writing it now." She pointed a thumb over her shoulder. "I'll let you get back to it. There's a community gardening club that meets Thursday mornings in the lobby if you're interested. No pressure." "I'll consider it. Thank you for the bread, Clara." After she left, I placed the plate on the kitchen counter. The gesture was simple, unprompted by pity or obligation. It was a welcome. The scent of banana and cinnamon filled the small kitchen. I cut a small slice. It was delicious. That afternoon, I finished making the bed with my own linen and quilt. I placed Harold's watch and wedding band in the top drawer of the bedside table. I set the photo of us from the beach on the dresser. The room felt like mine. It was not filled with the history of a shared life, but it was peacefully personal. My phone, which had been silent since Mr. Jenkins's call, buzzed on the kitchen counter. I looked at the screen. It was Danielle. I watched it ring. The buzzing was an insistent, angry sound in the quiet room. It went to voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again. Richard's number this time. I did not answer. It, too, went to voicemail. I finished unpacking a box of kitchen supplies. I put my favorite mug on a hook. I arranged the spices in a rack. The phone buzzed a third time. Danielle again. The sequence felt frantic. I picked up the phone, not to answer, but to set it to silent. I saw I had 2 voicemail notifications. Curiosity, more than anything, made me listen. I put the phone on speaker and continued putting away dishes. The first message was from Danielle. Her voice was thick, trying to sound calm and failing. "Mom, it's me. Please call me back. We need to talk. This is all a huge misunderstanding. You're making a terrible mistake. You're my mother. We can fix this. Just call me." There was a long pause, then the message ended. The second was from Richard. His tone was clipped, legalistic, but with an edge of barely contained fury. "Alina, this is Richard. I've consulted with counsel. Your actions are highly questionable. This so-called trust, the rapid sale of the house, it reeks of undue influence from this Jenkins character. We are preparing to challenge it. You are not thinking clearly. Call me immediately to discuss this before you cause irreparable damage to your family." I deleted both messages. I felt nothing. No anxiety, no fear, no anger. His threats were empty. Mr. Jenkins had anticipated everyone. The medical assessment was scheduled for Friday. The trust was ironclad. The house sale was proceeding. Marjorie had called yesterday to say we had a full-price offer, contingent only on inspection. Richard's bluster was the sound of a man realizing the walls had already been built around him. The banana bread sat on the counter. I looked at it, then out the sliding glass door to the small balcony. The afternoon sun was weak but present. I took my phone and opened the contacts. I selected Danielle's number. I did not call. I selected the option to block it. I did the same for Richard's number. The action was quiet, digital, and absolute. It felt more final than any shouted argument. It was a technological severance, clean and bloodless. That evening, I ate a simple dinner at my small table. I watched the news. I read a book. The silence in the condo was not the heavy, waiting silence of the old house. It was a neutral silence, one I could fill or not as I chose. At 9 o'clock, my phone lit up with a new email notification. It was from the community portal at the Greens. The subject line read, "Book Club invitation this month's read. The Glass Hotel by Emily St. John Mandel." I opened it. The message was from a resident named Arthur, who ran the club. It gave the meeting time, next Tuesday evening in the common room. New members always welcome. We provide the coffee and spirited debate. I did not reply immediately. I finished my chapter. I marked the date in the calendar on my phone. I would decide later. The option, the simple, uncomplicated invitation was what mattered. It existed. It was offered to me, Alina, not to a lonely grandmother to be managed. I went to bed that night in my new room. The streetlights cast soft, unfamiliar patterns on the ceiling. The sounds were different, the hum of a distant elevator, the faint sound of a television through the wall. They were the sounds of other lives, living separately but alongside mine. I did not feel alone. I felt separate. There was a profound difference. One was a condition of lack. The other was a state of being. I had chosen separation. In doing so, I had ended the loneliness they had counted on. The following week established a new pattern. I attended the book club meeting on Tuesday evening. There were 8 of us in the common room, a mix of men and women. Arthur, the facilitator, was a retired professor with a kind face and sharp questions. We discussed the novel. I contributed once, making a point about the fragility of constructed realities. A few people nodded. Clara, who was also there, gave me a warm smile. Afterward, over coffee, a man named Walter told a funny story about trying to use an e-reader for the first time. I laughed. It was a genuine, unforced sound I hadn't heard from myself in a long time. On Wednesday, I went to the gardening club with Clara. We repotted herbs in the bright, sun-filled atrium off the lobby. My hands in the soil felt familiar and good. I did not think about my old garden. I thought about the scent of basil and the feel of warm terracotta. On Thursday, Mr. Jenkins called. His tone was brisk and satisfied. "The medical assessment is complete. The report states you are of sound mind and full capacity, with a clear understanding of your financial and legal decisions. I have sent a copy to Richard Carter's attorney, with a note that any further challenges will be seen as frivolous and met with a request for sanctions. I have heard nothing back." "And the house?" I asked, wiping soil from my hands with a towel. "The inspection passed with minor notes. The buyers are proceeding. Closing is set for 8 weeks from now. The funds will be transferred directly to the trust. It is essentially done." "Thank you, Alistair." "There is one more thing, the check. It was cashed yesterday." I paused, the towel in my hand. They had taken the money. Of course they had. It was a significant sum. But cashing it was an admission. It was them accepting my version of the settlement. They had traded their moral claim for $28,450. The final accounting was closed. "I see," I said. "I thought you would want to know." After the call, I sat at my small dining table. The sun was setting, casting long orange rectangles of light across the wooden floor. The cashed check was the period at the end of their sentence. There was nothing left to dispute. They had their money. I had my freedom. The transaction was complete. That night, my phone rang. I had blocked their numbers, but this was a different number, one I did not recognize, a local area code. I let it ring. It went to voicemail. I waited a few minutes, then played the message. It was Danielle. Her voice was different from the previous message. The false calm was gone, so was the anger. It was just tired and thin and young. "Mom, it's me. I'm using a friend's phone. I guess you blocked us." A long sigh hissed through the speaker. I don't even know what to say. He's talking to lawyers, but they're telling him there's nothing to do. The house is sold. Your doctor's report, I saw the check. I didn't want to cash it. He did. He said it was stupid not to. She paused. I could hear her breathing shaky. "I keep thinking about what you said, that you believed us. I didn't think of it like that. I thought we were helping. I thought we were being smart for all of us. But I heard him laugh that day. I laughed too, and you heard it." Her voice broke. "I'm so sorry, Mom, not because we got caught, because we did it. I'm sorry." The message continued with more silence than words. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I needed to say it. To the phone, I guess. I miss you. I miss coffee. I don't know what else to say. Goodbye, Mom." The message ended. The automated voice stated the time and date. I held the phone. I listened to the message a second time. I analyzed the tone, the pauses, the cracks in her voice. It sounded real. It probably was real in this moment, surrounded by the wreckage of her own making. The shame was likely genuine. The regret was for the consequence, but also, perhaps, for the action. It was impossible to know how deep it went. I felt a sadness then. It was a deep, quiet ache, not for what was, but for what could never be again. The trust was a shattered vessel. You could glue the pieces, but it would never hold water. The relationship we had was broken. A new one, if it were ever to exist, would have to be built on entirely different foundations, and I had no interest in that construction project. Her apology did not change my mind. It did not soften my resolve. It merely confirmed the landscape of the ruin. I deleted the message. Then I blocked the new number. The final emotional severance was not a dramatic slash. It was this quiet deletion. It was choosing not to engage with the echo of the past. Her words were a ripple in the pond, but I was no longer standing in the water. I was on the shore. I walked out onto my balcony. The night was clear and cold. Lights from other apartments glowed warmly. Below, the garden paths were lit by small lanterns. I could hear faint music from an open window somewhere. Clara had mentioned a group going to the symphony on Saturday. She had an extra ticket. I had hesitated earlier, citing unpacking. But now I thought I might call her in the morning. I would like to hear the music. The peace I felt was not the absence of conflict. It was the presence of order. My life was in order. My home was secure. My time was my own. The people in my life were there by mutual choice, not obligation or manipulation. The chapter with Danielle and Richard was closed. The book was not over. It was simply moving on to a new part, when I was beginning to outline for myself, page by quiet page. I went back inside, closed the balcony door against the chill, and prepared for bed. The silence in my condo was full, not empty. It was the sound of a life settling, after a long storm, into its proper shape. The Saturday morning light was different here. It streamed through my east-facing kitchen window, clear and unobstructed by the large maple tree that had shaded my old bedroom. I woke without an alarm. The silence was not a burden to be filled, but a space I owned. I rose, made the bed, and dressed in comfortable clothes. I walked into the kitchen. The photograph of Harold smiled from the counter. The potted herb I'd repotted, a small rosemary plant, sat on the windowsill. I filled the kettle and set it on the stove. I measured coffee grounds into the French press. The actions were simple, ritualistic, and entirely mine. While the water heated, I took a cloth and wiped the already clean counter. I arranged 3 mugs on a tray. I took a plate of pastries from the bakery down the street out of the bread box. I placed them on a serving dish. Clara and Arthur were coming for coffee at 10. We were going to discuss forming a proper reading series for the community, using the common room. Arthur had ideas about themes. Clara was in charge of refreshments. I had offered to handle the logistics. The kettle whistled. I poured the water over the grounds, watching them bloom and darken. The rich, earthy scent filled the small kitchen. I set a timer for 4 minutes. I looked around. The condo was tidy. The books were organized on the shelves. The quilt from my old bed was draped over the back of the sofa. A painting I had bought at a local art fair, an abstract swirl of blues and greens, hung on the wall opposite the window. It did not match anything perfectly, and I liked it for that reason. The timer buzzed. I pressed down the plunger of the French press, a smooth, satisfying resistance. I poured the coffee into a small carafe. At 5 minutes to 10, there was a knock at my door. It was Clara holding a notebook. Am I early? I was too excited. Arthur is debating which font to use for the flyer. I told him to just pick one. You're right on time, I said, stepping aside to let her in. The coffee is ready. Arthur arrived moments later, bearing a folder of printouts. Good morning, Alina. I have samples, and I come bearing news from the front desk. Your package arrived. He handed me a small, thick envelope. The return address was from Mr. Jenkins's firm. I placed it on the kitchen counter, unopened. It could wait. We sat at my small dining table. I poured the coffee. Clara passed the pastries. We talked. We discussed book lists, scheduling, whether to charge a nominal fee for copies. Arthur advocated for structure. Clara argued for flexibility. I suggested a trial period of 3 months with a simple format, then a review. They agreed. The conversation flowed easily. It was not deeply personal. It was about shared interests, about building something small and useful for our community. There was no subtext, no manipulation, no careful parsing of tones. It was straightforward. After an hour, Arthur glanced at his watch. I must get to the post office. Thank you for the coffee, Alina, and the wise counsel. We'll reconvene next week with a draft flyer. Clara stayed to help me clear the dishes. This was lovely, she said, washing a mug at the sink. You've made this place so warm so quickly. It's coming together, I said, drying the mug she handed me. After she left, the quiet returned. I looked at the envelope on the counter. I opened it. Inside was a formal letter from Mr. Jenkins, confirming that the sale of the house had closed. The net proceeds had been wired to the trust. Enclosed was a summary statement of the trust's assets. The numbers were significant. They represented security, independence, and the tangible result of my decisions. There was also a brief, handwritten note on his personal stationery. Alina, all is settled and sealed. The matter is concluded. You should be proud of your resolve. Harold would be. Warmly, Alistair. I read the letter once, then filed it in the folder I kept for important documents in my new desk. I did not feel a surge of victory. I felt a quiet acknowledgement. A task, begun in the shadow of a closed door, was now complete. The ledger was balanced. I returned to the kitchen. I poured the last of the coffee into my mug. I took it out onto the balcony. The morning was warming. A few residents were walking below. Someone was tending to the raised vegetable beds in the community garden. I sat in the chair I had placed out there. I sipped my coffee. I thought about nothing in particular. I watched a bird land on the railing, look around, and fly off. My phone, inside on the counter, remained silent. I had no messages to dread, no calls to avoid. The peace was not an empty stillness. It was a productive quiet, one in which I could hear my own thoughts clearly. I had my home. I had my security. I had the beginnings of a community, chosen slowly and with care. The revenge was not a fiery spectacle. It was the slow, sure reclamation of a self that had been counted out. They had laughed at my loneliness, thinking it made me weak. They did not understand that loneliness, when confronted, can become the raw material for a formidable strength. The coffee was the perfect temperature. The sun was on my face. Inside, the remains of a pleasant morning with acquaintances sat on the table, waiting to be cleared away. Later, I might go for a walk. I might start the new book for the club. I might do nothing at all. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of coffee and cool morning air. I looked around my small balcony, at my reflection in the glass of the door, at the life contained within these new walls. A smile touched my lips. It was not broad or triumphant. It was small, private, and entirely genuine. It was the smile of a woman who was, finally and completely, home, on her own terms.